So our topic for this session today is public policy and the Farm Bill. And while some of you may be very familiar with the Farm Bill, many of you may not know what it's all about and why it is so important to IATP in shaping the future of food. IATP actually hosted a podcast series about the Farm Bill in 2023, and Lily Richard, the host of the podcast, is here to provide a summary. Lily is the Digital Communications Manager at IATP. Welcome, Lily.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Lily Richard, and as Claudia said, I'm the Digital Communications Manager at IATP, and last year I produced our podcast about what was supposed to be the 2023 Farm Bill. That series was called The Farm Bill Uprooted, and you can listen to it at iatp.org/uprooted or on any of the major podcast platforms. But for anyone here who's not already familiar with the Farm Bill, I've adapted some of the introduction to that series to give some context and background to what Michael and Nick will be talking about today, which is IATP's work on national level food and farm policy. So what's known as the Farm Bill is a huge omnibus spending bill that's supposed to be renewed about every 5 years and which helps set the course for our food and agriculture system in the US. The current bill was passed in 2018 and technically expired at the end of September 2023. Congress passed a 1-year extension of that bill, which means that the new expiration date is September 30th, 2024. But it's currently September 4th, 2024, and there's been hardly any movement that we're aware of in the process of writing a new bill and passing it through Congress. So we're not likely to see that happen this month. And the process may extend past November and beyond the elections. So the bill itself is hundreds of pages long, and it's divided into different sections called titles that connect to different government-funded programs aimed at farmers, institutions, and everyday people. In the current bill, there are 12 titles, and the biggest piece is the nutrition title, which covers the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, or SNAP, and accounts for 76% of Farm Bill spending under the current bill. Other major titles include crop insurance, commodities, and conservation. Sorry, I lost my place. And that's important because the way these different programs are designed and funded can play a huge role in shaping what our food system looks like. And right now, when you look at the US food and agriculture system, some pretty big problems are apparent. On the one hand, almost 19 million Americans live in food deserts with no access to fresh, nutritious food, and 34 million are considered food insecure, struggling to afford food, whether or not they live close to a grocery store. And with food costs rising, including through some of the purported price gouging we've seen with large food companies, more people are struggling with hunger and all of the associated problems with poverty, health, and poor nutrition. And yet at the same time, the price of most of our food and other agricultural products doesn't really reflect the true cost of producing it. Not only are market prices for main commodity crops like corn, wheat, and rice often less than the cost of production, but supermarket prices tend to flow towards corporate profits and don't incorporate things like the worker exploitation and climate and environmental harms caused by large-scale industrial farming and processing. Those costs get externalized, or in other words, dumped on those who weren't responsible for them. And the costs are piling up. About half of the water in the US is too polluted for drinking, swimming, or fishing, and industrial agriculture is the largest source of that pollution, as well as the leading factor in water shortages in the western part of the country. It's also a major culprit driving the climate crisis and the extinction of large swaths of Earth's diverse plant and animal species. And it's a rigid, input-dependent, homogeneous system that itself is particularly vulnerable to the impacts of these crises, like supply chain disruptions, droughts, and floods. And it's not working for rural communities or farmers either, except for the very largest producers. The challenges of our food system are huge, systemic, and interconnected, which is why the idea of creating one big comprehensive set of policies and programs to deal with them simultaneously seems to make sense. And the Farm Bill does fund some really important programs that support things like food assistance, local food systems, rural development, renewable energy, soil health, and biodiversity. But other parts of the Farm Bill, many of which were deliberately designed to benefit big agribusiness companies, helped us get into this mess in the first place. And the parts that do good things, like helping farmers adapt to become more resilient and sustainable, could be made to work better and could be better funded to actually meet the scale of the problems. And that's where IATP's research and advocacy comes in, alongside our many, many coalition partners. IATP has been working on the Farm Bill for many years, and today we're welcoming 2 experts who can share their insights and experiences. Nick Levendofsky is the Executive Director of the Kansas Farmers Union and a member of the IATP Board of Directors. And Michael Happ is the Program Associate for Climate and Rural Communities at IATP. So welcome, Nick and Michael, and I will let you 2 take the floor.
Thank you so much, Lily, and thank you, Claudia. Hi, everybody. I'm Michael Happ. I work at IATP as our Program Associate for Climate and Rural Communities. And Lily just gave a really great overview of what the Farm Bill is and what it does. And I'm going to just quickly share my screen and give you kind of a visual representation of some of the things that Lily just said. So yeah, as she mentioned, the Farm Bill, a huge chunk of it is, it's a nutrition bill, right? When you think of the Farm Bill, you're thinking about farm subsidies, you're thinking about maybe conservation, but the vast majority of it is nutrition assistance, right? The Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program being a big chunk of that, being 76%. Though kind of cost estimates going forward suggest that the upcoming Farm Bill, it might be upwards of 82% because of food inflation and things like that. But it's important as a safety net for hungry people. And you can see other slices of the pie include crop insurance, commodities, conservation, which is something that I work a lot on in our climate program here at IATP. And then, you know, as Lily mentioned, there are 12 total titles to the Farm Bill. These 4 titles are the vast majority of them, and the other titles are just that kind of slim 1% slice of that pie. So the majority of my work here at IATP focuses on Title II, the conservation title. There are folks, including members of my family, who farm, who want to do right by the land, but they need financial help to do something like that. So here's kind of an example of some of the things that the conservation title can help pay for, things like cover crops, fencing for rotational grazing, silvopasture, shelter belts for cropland, grassed waterways, and high tunnels for small-scale producers. This is kind of what we want to see supported through the Farm Bill, right? Helping folks improve soil health, maybe adopt kind of agroecological practices and systems for their farms. Programs such as the Environmental Quality Incentives Program, Conservation Stewardship Program, help farmers do that, kind of transition, whether it is addressing a soil health need, erosion, or adopting some of those broader systems aspects. But the thing is, roughly 2/3 to 3/4 of folks who apply to these programs are turned away. So as Lily mentioned, better funding, more funding for programs such as these will be really important to helping farmers adapt to a changing climate. And again, I will stop sharing my screen and just wanted to give a little overview of why I care about the Farm Bill and try to work on it and improve it. And again, IATP has been working on the Farm Bill for a long, long time. This is going to be the 7th Farm Bill since IATP has been an organization. Over my shoulder, you can see a really great poster here from 2007, what ended up being the 2008 Farm Bill. And these are IATP designs working for a fair Farm Bill for the world's hungry, for the world, for renewable energy, and for America. So I could I could probably talk a lot more about the Farm Bill and things like crop insurance and how, farmers, when you drive through rural America, you are in a lot of ways seeing people kind of planting to the program, right? How the Farm Bill is written affects how our landscape looks and how people's livelihoods look. And I'll pass it over to Nick, who has been a great thinker on this and a leader on Farm Bill issues.
Well, thank you, Michael. Nick Levendofsky, I'm the executive director of the Kansas Farmers Union. We're a family farm organization based here in Kansas, but we're part of the National Farmers Union, which is in DC. And actually next week, we're going to be, many of us from across the country are going to fly to DC and have meetings with members of Congress and their staff at USDA, leadership at USDA, other departmental agencies, and also the White House to discuss our priorities in the Farm Bill especially. But we've got a number of priorities to share. And of course, one of those is making sure that we maintain a strong nutrition title that is still coupled with the farm programs and the Farm Bill. If you were to separate that, as Michael showed, that's a huge chunk of that pie. And basically that is funding for USDA. If you were to pull that funding out, you would decimate USDA as we know it. It would no longer even need to be a departmental agency after that. And that is a goal of some folks in Congress and some organizations that are out there. I'm not going to name any names. I think you all probably know who I'm referring to, but that is not us. We want to make sure that we keep that title together and keep it strong and funded well. But I think one of the big important things that we'll be talking about when we go to DC next week and have these conversations is the Farm Bill's effect on climate and conservation and energy programs, things that are obviously very important to not just farmers, but also to consumers and people in general. And so we've got a couple priorities I'd like to just share with you. We're asking that the next Farm Bill give farmers the tools and resources that they need to address climate change through those conservation programs, many of which Michael just listed. And we also want to expand renewable energy and energy efficiency opportunities. So we're asking for an increase in funding for voluntary incentive-based conservation programs and conservation technical assistance. We're asking that they expand incentives for farmers to adopt climate change, climate mitigation and adaptation practices. We're also asking that they provide crop insurance discounts to farmers for planting cover crops or for using other conservation practices that increase resiliency or decrease risk. We're also asking that they support and improve the Rural Energy for America program. That's called REAP. There's a lot of acronyms that we'll be throwing out there, a lot of alphabet soup. But that's a program that helps a lot of people in rural areas of the country to put solar or wind energy on their farms and to also create efficiency in their farms and businesses. We're asking that they maintain a strong conservation reserve program, the CRP program. And that's a wonderful program that was established many, many years ago in the Farm Bill to address some of the issues that were happening right here in Kansas during the Dust Bowl of the Dirty 30s, when dust from Kansas and Oklahoma and other states here in the Great Plains and the Midwest was literally blowing to Washington, D.C. and turning the marble buildings red and brown. It's programs like CRP that ensure that we are taking that marginal land, that very low productive land, and putting it back into grass and ensuring that that land stays where it is and is protected. Finally, we're asking that there be an increase in research investments that support on-farm climate mitigation and adaptation. So we're at the forefront when it comes to this, not just Farmers Union, but IATP too. I think there's a lot of things here that we can agree on, and it's a matter of taking this message to Washington, D.C. next week and having these conversations with members of Congress and their staff and putting a voice to these issues, making sure that people understand that the issues that farmers are facing, especially when it comes to climate change or disastrous weather events, those kinds of things, that they understand that this is personal and it affects the daily lives of farmers and their bottom line. So we're looking forward to this opportunity. I know Lily mentioned that this was supposed to be the 2023 Farm Bill, and now it's looking more and more like it's not going to be the 2024 Farm Bill. But I just keep saying we're doing this for the next Farm Bill. So yeah, that's kind of where I am on things, or where we are at Farmers Union.
Yeah, thanks, Nick. And just a reminder, like, we can't do this alone, right? Groups like the Farmers Union partner with groups like IATP and other folks that we're in coalition with to have a strong movement message, right? Protecting things like conservation funding, making sure things like crop insurance work for all scales of farmers, right? And that the funding from the Farm Bill is open up to people at all scales and really supports rural communities. I'll give a little context on how IATP works in coalition advocating for the Farm Bill. So we are kind of a research and advocacy organization. We don't have a member base. We have the resources and time to kind of dive deeply into policy issues and put out reports like what were mentioned in the video, reports on cereal production and conservation programs and things like that. And we also work at the state, regional, and national level in coalition working on the Farm Bill. We're a part of a group called the Mini Ag Network, working with groups here in Minnesota that work on conservation and climate, but also nutrition, and making sure that we're supporting each other. And when we're advocating for the Farm Bill, that we're not undercutting one or the other. We also are a part of the REAMP network, which is a Midwest-focused coalition working on greenhouse gas reduction, and they're getting more and more involved in agriculture, and we're helping lead some of that work. We're also involved at the national level with organizations such as the Rural Coalition and the National Sustainable Agriculture Coalition. And in all of these coalitions that we're a part of, we partner with groups that are farmer-focused, that are farmer-led, and we kind of partner with them and say, what are the skills that we can bring to you? What kind of research do you need? What would be helpful for your member base as we advocate for a fair Farm Bill? And again, there's good stuff in the Farm Bill and there's not so good stuff in the Farm Bill, and there are things that are missing, right? One thing that we've been advocating for a long time is a competition title in the Farm Bill, right? You look at the ag sector, and in a lot of places, it's one of the most consolidated industries out there, especially when you look at things like meat packing, when you look at things like seed. There's just not a lot of competition out there. You might have a handful of companies, again, essentially price gouging our farmers and passing on a lot of the expense to consumers. And we believe that there needs to be a lot more federal action to address this crisis. And there has been some really good, some improvements in this administration on competition, but there's still a lot that can be done and should be done in the Farm Bill. And I know Nick, has a lot of thoughts on this as well.
I do, yeah. Thanks for bringing that up, Michael. We've also advocated strongly in this next Farm Bill for a competition title. I call it the lucky number 13 title, because it would expand it to 13 titles. And you're right, this administration has addressed a lot of these issues when it comes to competition in the marketplace for agriculture. Antitrust is tantamount for this administration, not just at USDA, but also at the Department of Justice. And we'll have meetings with high-level folks in both of those departments talking about this next week. But we have a program at National Farmers Union, a campaign called Fairness for Farmers. And a number of the things that we are advocating for when it comes to that is we want to address the inadequate cattle market price discovery and transparency issues. We want to establish an Office of Special Investigator for Competition Matters at USDA. That would help to ensure strong enforcement of the Packers and Stockyards Act. We also want to protect the ongoing Packers and Stockyards Act rulemakings, including addressing meat packer retaliation against growers. We want to reinstate mandatory country of origin labeling, or COOL. We also want to improve the Livestock Mandatory Reporting, or LMR Act, to ensure consistent and complete data availability. We want to ensure that checkoff programs, and these are programs that are an involuntary tax on farmers whenever they sell a product, whether it's cattle or hogs or a commodity crop. Those checkoff programs take a percentage off of each sale that then go into their marketing programs. And I would argue some of them use those dollars for lobbying, which they're not supposed to. But we want to ensure checkoff programs are producer controlled and regularly reviewed. We also support the expansion of diverse local and regional market opportunities in farm and food supply chains, including in production, processing, distribution, and retail. Every month, the National Farmers Union puts out their farmer share of the retail food dollar. And if you go to their website and look that up, you'll see that on average, the American farmer is only bringing in about 14.6 cents off every dollar that is spent at the grocery store. 60 years ago, that was 50 cents. So farmers were making half, they were bringing in half of every dollar that was spent by the American consumer. Now we're below that 15 cents mark because you've got the processors, you've got the retailers, you've got the transporters, you've got all of that. But now we're fighting against these packers, the meat packers and those folks, because they've got so much control on the market. It's no longer a monopoly. It's become an oligopoly. And we need to get in there and do like Teddy Roosevelt did back in the early 1900s and bust them up. And this administration is doing that. They are going after these bad actors, and they are holding them accountable. So we need to keep at that and make that a continued priority moving forward.
Yeah, that's amazing, Nick. And I'll just give a little more context of where the Farm Bill is today before we pass it over for Q&A. So as Lily and Nick both mentioned, there was supposed to be a 2023 Farm Bill. It's approaching the latter part of 2024. We might see it into next year or whenever. And a lot of the main sticking points for not passing a Farm Bill right now, not only is there split control in Congress where you've got a Republican House and a Democratic Senate, and the main sticking points between the two chambers involve nutrition and climate and commodities. Probably the largest sticking point being nutrition, where there are those who want to cut nutrition assistance over the next 10 years, and folks on the other side who are kind of digging their heels in and saying, no, that's not acceptable. This is largely a nutrition bill, and we can't leave hungry folks out to dry. There's also the issue of climate, where we have all sorts of new investments in climate smart agriculture from the Inflation Reduction Act, and there are proposals to bring that into the Farm Bill, and folks are kind of debating over whether to keep that into climate or whether to dedicate it to all sorts of different conservation programs, good and bad. And then I'm not going to get too in the weeds here, but those are kind of the main top line sticking points on why there isn't a Farm Bill yet, and it has gotten politicized a little bit this year. But I'll pass it over to Claudia, who has been keeping an eye on the Q&A and the chat to see what kind of questions you all have.
Yeah, thank you, Michael and Nick. And it's clear that we're only really able to scratch the surface on this, and that between the two of you, you could probably talk Farm Bill for the next 6 hours. But it just I hope it just helped everybody understand a little bit that the Farm Bill does matter to all of us, and the future of our food and what ends up on our plates and how it gets there and who benefits from that, and how IATP's advocacy and our partnership in coalitions, how we work on these large national policy topics. So Anna has a question. What policy endeavors here in Minnesota are the most important for the Twin Cities folks to be supporting now? So what's some of the work that we're focusing on here in Minnesota?
So considering that the Farm Bill is this federal bill, it's important to kind of highlight how it affects Minnesotans. So for example, the Conservation Stewardship Program helps farmers have conservation systems across their whole farm and adapt to climate change. And Minnesota has actually received more CSP contracts than any other state in the country. And yet still only 12% of farmers who apply to that program in Minnesota are accepted. So advocating for more and better funding for that program and saying Minnesota has been a leader on this, on conservation agriculture, would go a long way and try to expand some of those conservation benefits nationwide. And again, highlighting that there are a lot of hungry folks in Minnesota as well, and making sure we have a strong nutrition title that provides a safety net for folks.
Yep. And if any of you are interested, so we're going to have a series of 4 of these, and the next session is actually going to be talking about community food systems, where we do focus more on Minnesota, and we will probably talk about some of that stuff in that session. Thanks, Michael. Another question is from Peter. What is IATP's thinking about shifting farm subsidies away from maize, soybean, et cetera, and much more toward fruit and vegetables in the US? Nick or Michael?
Yeah, I can try to answer that quickly, and then Nick, if you have anything to add, feel free to. And it's a complicated question, right? There's the commodities title does directly subsidize some of the big commodity crops like corn and soybeans and wheat. And there are other barriers to adopting a more fruit and vegetable centered production system. One of them being crop insurance, right? It's a lot harder to get insurance for a diversified farming operation. There is a program called the Whole Farm Revenue Protection Program that is supposed to do that, but it is kind of cumbersome for folks. A lot of local insurance agents don't understand it really, and folks are having a hard time accessing it. So strengthening that program, making it more usable, strengthening local markets. The federal government also has a lot of purchasing power, right? And making sure that departments like the US Department of Agriculture and even the Department of Defense that have these huge budgets and buy a lot of food, right? How can we encourage them to buy more fresh and local fruits and vegetables and help bolster our local economies?
I would echo that, Michael. I think decentralizing our food system is key, and the federal government could lead the way in this. They could definitely be looking closer. And USDA's definition of local food is within 400 miles. Well, there's a lot of food that could be grown within 400 miles. Food that feeds people, not just feed for animals. So we need to talk about that. We need to highlight that and make that an important point when we're discussing the Farm Bill and its future. But he also brings up a really good point about whole farm revenue protection. We have a good number of farmers in Farmers Union here in Kansas and Minnesota, all across the country, that are growing food for people. And, a lot of times climate change, weather disasters, those kinds of things affect the food that they're growing. And they don't have protection like commodity farmers have for crop insurance. And it doesn't make them whole by any means, but it certainly helps to protect their bottom line and keep their head above water. But whole farm revenue protection is not affordable, and it's not accessible for a lot of farmers. And we've got to make those two things happen. We've got to make it more affordable. We've got to make it more accessible. Just as for instance, one of our board members here at Kansas Farmers Union grows 63 different crops during the growing season. And her growing season is basically year-round now because she's growing in high tunnels and hoop houses and those kinds of things. If she were to take out crop insurance on all 63 crops, she wouldn't make any money at all because you'd have to do it individually for each crop, just like commodity farmers do for their corn, their soybeans, their wheat, their milo, those kinds of things. So we've got to make it more affordable for those farmers that are growing food for people, for human consumption, to be able to access these types of programs.
Thank you, Nick. And then we also have a question from Selden, who's talking about cover crops. He said, or they said, the concern I've heard about promoting cover crops is that often the cover crops need to be cleared with herbicides. Does IATP promote another option for clearing the cover crops?
Yeah, I mean, I think the conservation practice standards for things like cover crops at USDA do need to be updated and more flexible for folks who don't want to do things like that, who look at a conservation standard where spraying down their cover crops with herbicides maybe goes against their concept of what it means to be a farmer, and incorporating it more into practices like organic management and figuring out ways that the cover crops can still grow. Can you harvest them? Can you graze them while also growing, your main staple crop for the year there? Yeah, we totally support other ways of using cover crops for sure.
Okay, I think we'll have one more question, and I see a question from Cameron. Any language in the bill for brownfield remediation to create more ag land in the urban context? First, can you explain what brownfield remediation is, and then what this means?
So I'm not a brownfield expert, but it essentially is cleaning up, contaminated land or making sure that the soil is clean enough to be growing food in an urban context. And the current Senate Agriculture Committee Chair, Debbie Stabenow, is from Michigan and has been a longtime champion of urban agriculture. And there is a lot of language on urban agriculture in there, a lot more support. I know a lot about conservation programs, and the High Tunnel program through the Environmental Quality Incentives Program has been hugely popular with urban growers and has helped them extend their growing season and make sure that they can have growing make sense at their small scale. I don't know about brownfield in particular, so I might not be able to answer that question, but we'll encourage you to look up the urban ag parts of the Farm Bill.
Unfortunately, I can't speak to that either. I can speak a little bit to the urban ag side of things, having worked in, Madison, Wisconsin for Wisconsin Farmers Union and in Denver for Rocky Mountain Farmers Union. But we also have urban ag growers here in Kansas too, primarily in the Kansas City and Wichita areas. So addressing that issue, and Michael, you're exactly right. That EQIP program has really expanded those options for folks. I'd have to dig in a little deeper on the brownfield remediation side of things, and I'll be glad to do that. But I think that the Senate Farm Bill is the key here. That is the Farm Bill that frankly, the adults in the room wrote that Farm Bill. And we're looking at that one as the compromise Farm Bill. So I think there's a lot of good things there. And as you mentioned, Debbie Stabenow, who's the chairwoman of the Senate Ag Committee, this is her last Farm Bill. She's made urban ag a priority, and we're looking at that as being the way to continue to support and lift up urban agriculture production.
Okay, well, thank you, Michael, and thank you, Nick. And I'm sure we could go on for a while longer, but want to make sure we end on time. So we dropped a couple of pieces of information in the chat, in the links, and I will follow up with all of you to send out those links again, so you don't have to grab them out of the chat. And then we also have a series of these, and since you signed up for this one, you will receive the information for the next following one. So we will have a community food systems program in October, and then another program specifically focused on climate and agroecology then following in November and December. And you will all receive a follow-up email from me with all of this information, so you don't have to frantically scribble it all down right now. And we want to thank you all for attending Shaping the Future of Food and supporting IATP and our work and our advocacy. And special thanks to Michael and Nick Levendofsky for sharing your knowledge and thoughts about the Farm Bill today. Thank you so much, everybody.